This is an SM Media production. Hi folks, and welcome to the second episode of this series of The Rewind right here on SM Media. I'm Scott McPike. It's an absolute pleasure to be your host as always. We are looking at Dundee United in this week's episode, and in particular the reign of the manager of Ivan Golac. What happened when Dundee United appointed Yugoslav international Ivan Golac to be the club's new manager, replacing long-term mainstay Jim McLean, who had obviously moved upstairs to be chairman of the club. And what followed was a difference from the status quo. Is that fair? I think that's fair to say, when Dundee United actually won the Scottish Cup. But we'll go through it all in detail, and I'm delighted to be joined by, in this week's episode, long-term Dundee United fan, Alan Fisher. Alan, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Scott, thanks very much for the invite, mate. It's a pleasure to come on.
I'm really looking forward to this one. This is one where it's hard to really kind of think about just how weird this time is from a Dundee United perspective, I'd imagine.
Yeah, it's I thought I'd seen it all, mate. I've seen them beat Mönchengladbach with Mateus in the team 5-0, and I've seen them lose 5-0 to Ayr United at Tannadice. I've seen them win at the New Camp, and I've seen them lose at Boghead. But the last few weeks have just added another chapter to it, and it's been a really disappointing spell as far as I'm concerned, because I think a good manager has lost his job on the back of what we're led to believe being player power, which is very, very disappointing, and obviously some horrific results didn't help matters either.
No. It kind of rings a bell though to the 90s. Is that fair to say? Like a new manager. Dundee United went through a lot of managers in the past 30 years, but I don't think there's been a managerial change as seismic as this at Dundee United than there was in 1990.
Well, that's definitely the quickest change there's ever been. Easily. And it's incredible, because we went from the high, one of the best nights at Tannadice for 20, 30 years, to absolutely horrendous, pathetic performances within about 3 weeks. Costing, to me, as I said, what I think is a good manager, his job. And it's very, very disappointing. And now we're back to square one.
Yeah, and it's weird times, but who do you think? Do you think Liam Fox is our runner for the job?
Well, to me, the last couple of seasons, although we got fourth last year, the standard of football was actually horrific. And to me, Liam Fox has been there during that period, so it's not one I'd be picking, to be honest with you. I'd almost say guilty by association also with what's been going on recently. So no, I'd prefer a clean broom. But the problem is that I don't think the manager gets a chance to manage the club properly. I think there's too much outside interference that are looking, to me, they just want somebody as a head coach that can be manipulated. So right away, you're ruling out. I mean, I might personally be wanting Derek McInnes and Tony Docherty, but I can't see them coming into that sort of setup.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be an interesting few weeks for Dundee United. But let's turn the clock back to 1993, when Jim McLean had moved upstairs. He'd obviously moved upstairs as chairman in 1989, but his managerial run had came to an end in 1993 when he moved upstairs permanently. What were your memories of that? Like, obviously, Jim McLean, legendary figure at Dundee United, had obviously won the league, had worked wonders at the club, but when he was kind of making that full-time movement into the director's box, what was your memories of that time?
I think it was maybe time for a change, Scott, because I think the old style of management, I mean, you certainly wouldn't get away with it now. Fergie, Fergie was the same, the hairdryer type scenario. You wouldn't get away with it now. And there was starting to see a change of the new young breed that had come in, the likes of Big Dunk, Ray McKinnon, Andy McLaren, and Welsh and all these boys. I don't think they were so compliant that maybe players in the past had been and just said, yes, Jim, no, Jim, and go on. But I think it was maybe a wee bit more they were a bit more gallous. And I think Jim would find that hard to deal with. It's just a different attitude. they were all great players, but I think things were changing. It was maybe just about the right time for him to move on. I mean, he'd been there something like 20 years, so I say it was maybe just the right time.
Do you think it was a case of as well that football had changed in front of Jim McLean's eyes? Like, as you say, the painting, the digging ditches, the painting the gyms and things like that.
Go and clean my car and all that sort of thing. That's exactly right, Scott. You weren't going to get away with that any longer. And Jim would have found that very difficult. I think agents were becoming a bigger issue as well, and he was pulling what he had left out, trying to deal with these types of guys. So sometimes in life there just comes an end of a natural end to an era, and that was probably just about the right time.
Usually by an end of an era, though, this is an interesting thing. Usually you kind of know who's going to replace Jim McLean. Yeah. Was there a thing at the time of like this? It might be like the assistant at the time maybe getting the job or something. Was there any talk of who was going to be the replacement? Was it?
Well, there was. You know what, Scott? We had absolutely no idea, and there was very little said in the press. It was quite a closely guarded secret. And Jim tried to make out he had no input into the new manager's position at all. I find that hard to believe, the way that he controlled everything that went on at the club. But he was adamant that he wasn't a party to the decision. But Golac was one that was right out the left field. Weren't expecting that. We're probably expecting a Scottish manager, to be honest with you. I can't remember who was assistant at the time. It might have been Paul Sturrock, or thought it might have been Luggy. But no, that was Ivan getting the job was a shock.
When you think Ivan Golac, obviously you think of his playing career. Now he had a really, really underrated playing career. He'd obviously done really well at Partizan Belgrade. He'd spent a lot of his career at Southampton as a player, so he would have been well known in Scotland and Britain at that point as a player.
Yeah, I mean, I think he won Goal of the Year one time on Match of the Day, and everybody was aware of who he was, and he was kind of swashbuckling, almost ahead of his time, attacking full back. So I thought if his playing style for his team was going to be anything like the way he played himself, it was quite exciting.
Mm-hmm. And the thing as well, obviously gets appointed in 1993, but it's crazy to think that this is the first time a foreign manager gets appointed to a Scottish club. I'm gobsmacked at that.
I didn't realise that either. That's amazing.
And you think about that as well, like what that was, would that have added to the surprise as well that Dundee United had went for this gamble of this guy who obviously in Scottish football, as you know, is very, very weird in terms of its outsiders very rarely do well. Is that fair to say?
It's usually the same old faces, isn't it?
Yes.
The Largs Mafia, they used to call it.
Yes. And I think that's a similar case now. I think it's like you're sitting there about Derek McInnes, and at the moment it's going with the kind of guys you know, as opposed to maybe taking a chance and going further afield. So at the time, what was your kind of memories when you were you surprised and strangely optimistic when Golac was appointed, or was it?
Yeah, totally. I mean, it was a surprise, but it was almost like a new broom. And we were spoilt at that time. We were expecting to be in the top four, and invariably were. And then you start to think, well, maybe Jim can't take us any higher. It's naive now when you look back on it, God. So we thought, well, maybe somebody new coming in now can push us on a bit further, because we hadn't won anything since '83. Although we'd had numerous cup finals after that, but we hadn't actually won anything. So the fact that we're making a change, nobody was throwing their hands up with horror at it. With people thinking it was maybe time for a fresh face to come in and a fresh voice in the changing room.
Mm-hmm. What was the kind of media's reaction to the Golac appointment? Was it kind of similar to what we've seen in recent years of the kind of they're out with the attack dogs out, kind of who's this foreigner coming in? Was that?
No, I think generally it was quite. All the media were quite happy, because I think Jim intimidated quite a lot of the media as well, so they were probably quite glad to see the back of him, in all honesty. And as here was this new guy, friendly face, very welcoming to everybody. So he got quite a good reception from the media when he was brought into the job.
Mm-hmm. The thing of Dundee United with cup finals in the McLean era is something I want to get your thoughts on. Was Dundee United just couldn't win a cup final? What was the memories of those cup finals? Like obviously the Motherwell one's a famous one you'll remember, but it was this thing with Jim McLean. He just couldn't win that cup final.
We'd won the 2 league cups in 79, 80, and then 81 played Rangers at Hampden, actually in both cup finals that year. And we're 1-0 up, and Paul Sturrock scored an unbelievable goal that was disallowed. And that was in the second half, and United went totally into a shell, gave Rangers momentum. Rangers scored 2 late goals, and that was the start of it. That was the start of what we'd called the Hampden Hoodoo at that time.
Mm-hmm.
I always felt United would try to go Hampden and nick finals, as opposed to Fergie would go down the road with Aberdeen. We're going to win this, whereas we were kind of hoping we could win it. And often we treated it like an away European tie, Scott, which is, 2-1 away in Europe's no bad result, but it's no use in a cup final.
No.
And it was quite, I think there was 3 or 4 cup finals we were lost from winning positions. And Jim, believe it or not, had an awful lot of self-belief. And I think that sometimes showed up in cup finals. He was too worried about the opposition, as opposed to us going out and posing our game on them. And to be fair, the Motherwell game, that was a really strong Motherwell team. Probably the best in my lifetime. It was a very strong St Mirren team, and lost to St Mirren. 88 Celtic's double winning team. I think it was just on the cards, but there was other games, against Rangers. But for instance, that we should have won. We certainly should have won another 2 or 3 trophies. In all honesty, if we're just showing a bit more self-belief. But it came to the stage where you were just going through thinking this is going to be another defeat. So it was a surprise when we actually did win it.
The obviously the start of that Ivan Golac run was the sale of Duncan Ferguson to Rangers. Now, Duncan Ferguson had obviously been a massively impressive young talent coming through at Dundee United. Obviously off the field, maybe a bit more well known as well, but he was a top talent. What was it like to lose him to Rangers? Was it that kind of thing of the money was too good to turn down, or was it were you gutted to lose such a big player?
Scott, obviously disappointed, but I think you can always tell at a club that sometimes when the players getting too big for the club, and they've got to go on to bigger things. Mm-hmm. And I don't think anybody grudged him his move to Rangers. He probably deserved the bigger stage, but obviously a huge loss. I think he gave a lot of lads in the changing room confidence in big games, because he was so confident himself and he was so gallus. And also a huge physical presence. I mean, I remember his debut was actually at Ibrox, and he came on and he ragdolled Richard Gough and John Brown, and he was about 17 or 18. Mm-hmm. And they're looking at each other saying, who the hell's this kid? Disappointing. I don't think Dunk ever really fulfilled his potential. He should have done better than he did. Like, don't get me wrong, such some great moves and made a lot of money, but I think he should have won a lot more in the game than what he did. But as I say, he's had a good career. But yeah, he was a massive loss to us at the time, no doubt about that.
Yeah, have you ever heard the story about what happened with him and Jim McLean in the gym?
When he's painted on the wall.
Yeah, and that again, and we know that takes a lot of guts though. Like we think of Jim McLean as this strict disciplinarian of obviously run like his ways wouldn't work now, and they certainly wouldn't. But the guts of doing that about 17, 18 to write on to call your manager that word and write it.
Apparently, Luggy went and told him, and off the record, the two of them were pissing themselves laughing at it. The fact that he had the balls to do it. But that was done. As I was saying, maybe Jim would start to struggle with the attitude of the younger players of not being as fearful of the manager as the old brigade had been.
Yeah, and was there a kind of seismic shift in terms of like the kind of crop that came through that won the league, the likes of Malpass, Hegarty, Neri, and now you've got the likes of Christian Daly, Andy McLaren, Duncan Ferguson, kind of maybe bigger characters, is that fair to say? Like particularly McLaren and Ferguson, who were kind of, I mean, I know Andy McLaren well. Andy McLaren certainly wouldn't hide his opinion.
No, yeah, that's right. And I think it's almost like if you think of Pep's great Barcelona team, they were all, Ibrahimovic called them choir boys because they just did exactly what the manager was told. But by doing exactly what the manager was told, you got great success. Mm-hmm. And you're winning trophies and you're playing in World Cups. Whereas, again, the younger generation, and it's just a generational thing. I don't think it was anything personal against the manager, where the people were just saying, "I'm not taking that shite off him." You know, so there was definitely a bit of that. So I say it was probably just the right time for him to go up the stairs.
And this thing as well, like obviously Duncan Ferguson left for $4 million, but the replacement at the time was. What was the reaction when the replacement for Duncan Ferguson was Craig Brewster for $250,000?
Well, I mean, Craig had lived in Dundee, he's a United fan, and he'd been at United in the youth system, but hadn't worked out, and he'd gone back into the forfeit, scored a barrel load of goals, Wraith Rovers, and scored even more goals. So everybody knew him. But I think, well, obviously, you're hoping he's going to do well, but you're thinking, God, we're going with a $250,000 player to replace a $4 million player. But you know what? You kind of had faith in Jim at that time that he'd pull a rabbit out of the hat, so to speak.
Yeah. The start of that season, do you remember being unbeaten in the first 8 games of the season, but 6 draws in there? What was the memories of the first kind of few games of the Golac reign?
It was the first game I actually remember more than any. It was Aberdeen at Tannadice. And it was a great sort of enthusiasm about it and optimism. But I remember he put Craig Brewster out wide, and I think he got subbed at half time. At least he was. So, you know, you'll take a draw against Aberdeen. That's fine. But there was it wasn't a brilliant start, but I don't think there was any panic, and nobody was going to give the manager a hard time. He was going to have to get a bedding in period and let the players get used to him as well. So, you know, we're not overly worried that we wasn't setting Heather on fire.
And what kind of strikes me when I go through this team is there's a really good mix of kind of experience and youth.
Yes.
You've got the likes of Malpaz, obviously had been there and done it. Petric was coming in. David Bowman was there. Jim McInally, Billy McKinlay. Billy McKinlay as well, obviously went on to have a really good career, but there's so much of a good mix, and was this the kind of time where you felt it was all kind of blending in together, where one generation was on its way down, but this younger generation was kind of coming through at the same time?
100%, and it was the best crop of young players we'd had since we'd won the league. We'd had other groups of players that come in maybe about 87 or 88, but these guys looked like they were going to be the real deal. So there was a lot of optimism about the place. And there were so many players in the system, under 15, Scotland, 16, 17s, 18s, 21s, that, you know, you're thinking there's this you always thought this never-ending conveyor belt of talent was going to go on forever, but it didn't in the end.
No. And what kind of strikes me as well is, like, this is at the time, was second place out of the reach at the time for Dundee United, because Celtic Rangers were obviously far and away clear, but second place wouldn't have been out the realms of
possibility. It wouldn't have been out because there didn't seem to be the financial disparity that you've got now. You know, it just didn't seem to be impossible in your thought. I mean, it's impossible now to even get second in Scotland, pretty much, and that's getting replicated right across Europe. The haves and the have-nots, the gaps is just getting bigger and bigger. But at that time, no, it wasn't impossible to be aiming for sort of second or third. Definitely not.
Yeah. The Golac had obviously come in, and I think I'm just going to kind of be straight with this. How different was the attitude from McLean to Golac? I think with McLean, we think of, as we say, this really kind of old school manager, but Golac had come in with this laid back attitude. Famously, was taking the players for walks in the park and things like that. Did you see that, the difference? Did you see that in the touchline with Golac? Like, it was far more laid back than McLean.
Oh yeah. I mean, in the old days, if United were having a poor spell during the match, and Jim would sometimes either sit up in his wee office in the short sleeves, and the door would fly open, and he'd come down onto the track, and it would lift. You know, the players, you see, they're quick in their step. It would lift the crowd, and you'd see he's different. Ivan didn't. That wasn't his style at all. It was a laid back style. But as much as the players, I think, liked it, I think they kind of maybe missed a little bit of the way Jim had been. Certainly fitness-wise, United was super fit under McLean and Watty Smith, etc. But the fitness levels, you start to hear stories of players going and doing extra on their own because the fitness wasn't good enough. So stories began to creep in after not that long that maybe things weren't. Maybe it wasn't so great to be in a holiday camp after all.
When Golac obviously was a kind of, what was it like as well? Like, obviously, it was in the media, like McLean. I mean, famously, obviously, the incident with John Barnes. But I mean, I wouldn't have liked to interview Jim McLean. I think it'd been very tough. But I think Golac gave you more as well. I think Golac was very, well, obviously a different kind of. It was different for the media as well, because this was the kind of, as I say, the first time they dealt with a foreign manager. But what was it like, kind of, as a media guy? Because anytime you listen to him, he seems to be kind of very calm, he's very detailed about what he wants to say, and I think for a probably Dundee United fan at the time, that would have been very nice to hear, as opposed to McLean's kind of opposite approach.
Yeah, I mean, I think the media loved him because he always had a story. You know, the Jeremy Nixon's worth 10 million. You know what I mean? And that's equivalent to 100 million now. By the time we went to Ibrox and he says we're going to win 3-0, and we're 3-0 up after 23 minutes. It was lunacy. But no, I said the papers did like him, and I think the players liked him as well. They did, and they were playing for him. And it was maybe just too much of a change to go from one extreme to the other. That's maybe ultimately what cost him his job.
What were your memories of that 3-0 win? Obviously, a 1-0 win at Tannadice over Celtic in November, but a 3-0 win away to Rangers and just before Christmas on the 11th of December. And Golac said he predicted it.
Yeah, he did. It was mad, and it was a great performance, and it was a good Rangers team, a really good Rangers team. But what that did was it gave the team confidence that when it came to the cup final end of the season, they knew they could go to Glasgow and would have a good chance of beating Rangers. So it was great for that.
Do you remember how tight the third round tie was against Arbroath in that cup run?
Yeah, I mean, it was the usual howling gale. I was at that game, and I remember Craig Brewster scored a superb shot with the wind behind his back. But Arbroath's always a tough place to go, and you know, at the end of the Scottish Cup, you just want to get through. That's all that matters at the end of the day. So that was a really tough tie.
The whole thing, obviously, the league. One thing you look when you see this league run is the amount of draws, and it stands out immediately just how many draws there are in that league. They finished sixth, but there was obviously an encouraging team. It was, as you say, a really good balance to it. League Cup semi-final defeat to Hibs as well. Was that a disappointment at the time?
Yeah, that was at Tynecastle. I remember that. I think Darren Jackson scored for Hibs, which was disappointing as well, being an ex-player. But again, semi-final, you get there, it's the young lads getting more experience, which helps you when you get to your next semi-final. So it's never, it's disappointing not to win, but it's never a waste. It's never a waste of a night. It was worth it to give the boys the wee bit of experience for going into the Scottish Cup semi-final.
Yeah. Motherwell was the next game. Obviously a rematch from '89. The first tie, 2-2 draw at home. What are your memories of that day? Craig Brewster by Drums.
Brewster, that was the day that Brewster kind of arrived. He scored 2 brilliant goals. That's when the fans really took to him that day. He'd been struggling a bit up to then. He was a bit down in the mouth. But that really gave him the confidence to kick on. And I think it was John Phillips scored with the last kick of the game to take it to the replay at Fir Park. And that's a difficult place to go. So that was an absolutely huge result for United to win there that night.
Do you remember who scored the goal at Fir Park?
Brian Welsh.
Brian Welsh, correct. Was that was obviously... There would have been a thing, obviously, of not getting the job done at home, as you say, but going to Fir Park, as you say, which is never easy, and getting that victory would have been massive.
Well, Scott, was funny. There was just a kind of confidence of feeling that this was our year. And United took something like 5,000 to Motherwell that night on a Wednesday night. There was just everybody just kind of felt that we're finally going to do it this year. So they were carrying a great support to all the cup ties. But yeah, it's never easy at Fir Park. Never easy. That was a huge result.
No. It goes on to the quarter-finals away to Airdrie. Nothing each draw. Were you at that?
Yeah, and Brewster sent off, if I remember right, in that game. So again, we're just happy to get back to Tannadice because, again, it used to be really tough going to Airdrie as well, that wee stadium. The replay, I think Andy McLaren scored a double.
It was a 2-0 win. It was Andy McLaren and Billy McKinlay with the 2 goals at home. and the semi-final set with Aberdeen. Now, Aberdeen are obviously in the way down at that point. Fergie had left. I think Wally Miller's the manager at this point. But was there still that newfound rivalry at the time? Like,
oh yeah. That's something for boys of my age that, I mean, for us, Dundee's our biggest game, but Aberdeen's our second biggest game. That rivalry's kind of still there, but the guys of a certain age, certainly. I used to love the Old Firm derbies, especially when it was wee Jim against Fergie, and you get a full house, you get a great day up Aberdeen, and they'd bring a big support down to Dundee. A great atmosphere. So, yeah, that was a game we're looking forward to, going to Hampden. We had a lot of confidence going into that match.
Hampden in the 9th of April, a 1-1 draw. Brian Welsh again, but Aberdeen scored. What's your memories of that first game?
Well, I think Van de Kamp and the Golf United flogged it after about 2 minutes. We were just inside the ground and he flogged it. And then Welsh scored with the last kick the last header of the game. And again, that's when you start thinking our name's on this trophy, the last minute equaliser. But it was back again to Hampden, I think, on the Wednesday night. It was crazy. It should have been at Dens or something, really, or even Edinburgh. And Jimmy Mark came up with the one goal that separated the sides with a late goal on the night. So,
and it was a trip to Hampden to play Rangers in the final. Now, as we mentioned, this Rangers team are going for back-to-back trebles. They're dominating Scottish football. But Golac's confident. I mean, one thing about Ivan Golac was he knew he fancied his chances, and he was very positive. One thing you can say about him is, listening to him, and I've listened to a couple of his interviews in the past couple of days, he was very confident in that team.
Well, we played Rangers Ibrox just a couple of weeks before. I think Rangers had tied up the league a good few weeks before, and they were almost, in the flip-flops scenario and on the beach, and United went to Ibrox and Rangers won 2-1. United played really well on the day. That gave them a lot of confidence going into the final. And I think Rangers mentally it possibly switched off just a little bit with having won the league so soon. So again, that game was giving us confidence for going into the cup final.
Mm-hmm. The cup final, obviously the thing that will stick out is the goal. But getting into that game, what was it like? Or was there fears that this is going to be another day, just another cup final, or was there did you feel something different?
No, it was strange. A lot of people were confident, and I've no idea why. I mean, probably Ivan. That was probably the Ivan effect. Mm-hmm. You had everybody relaxed. The players the day before the final went to Hamilton races. They were allowed to have a couple of beers if they wanted it. I mean, a completely different attitude. I think Jim used to give the team the fear going into finals, unfortunately, again through his own insecurities. Mm-hmm. Whereas Ivan had them going there believing we're going to win the cup. There wasn't any doubt about it.
Mm-hmm. One thing that strikes me is it's a really attacking lineup. I mean, I'll go through the team and you can see if you agree, but Van de Kamp, Malpas, Petric, Brian Welsh is your back three, McInally, Bowman, Hanna, Cleland, and then a front three of Daly, Brewster and McLaren.
Yeah.
Certainly doesn't fear them. Certainly he's going for this.
Yeah. And Cleland was pushing forward from the wide position. There was no playing it KG sitting in or anything like that. They went for it right from the start. There was no hanging about. There was a very, very positive attitude.
Mm-hmm. Dundee United had a penalty claim turned down in the 11th minute, but it was goalless at half time. What was the memories of that? Was that a penalty?
Well, I think you've got to murder somebody in Glasgow to get a penalty. You know what I mean? I didn't. Yeah, possibly. Rangers might have got it, but we weren't getting it.
Was there still that feeling? Was there still that feeling at half time of this confidence?
Yes, yeah. The feeling, because obviously the longer the game goes on, if you can nick a goal, and then you have something to hang on to. So there was definitely still a feeling of confidence going into the second half, because we'd matched Rangers in the first half, definitely.
Yeah. The second half, it only takes 2 minutes for Dundee United to take the lead. Ali Maxwell, I still don't know to this day what he's doing, but his attempt at a clearance comes off Christian Daly, who kind of weirdly I don't think he's trying to score. I think he's trying to just get the ball as close to the line, and Brewster's there to put it in. I mean, what a feeling that must have been.
Well, actually, for a hometown boy, you know what I mean. It's a dream come true to score the winner in the cup final, and it was the longest 43 minutes of my life, I'll tell you. After that, I think I spent half of them in the toilet.
that goal obviously gives Dundee United a massive boost, and Rangers come back for an equaliser. But one thing I want to get your thoughts on was a save that goes very much under the radar. Van de Kamp's save from Mikhailichenko is one of the best saves. Yeah, that is one of the best saves I think I've seen.
And I think then, Scott, that's whenever you start to think this is our day, you know, because that was only about 15 to go, something like that. And despite, I think Rangers brought in Big Dunk as well at the end to join Haley up front. But you know what, Brian Welsh won and Petric won just about every header. And they never really threatened after that chance. That was the big chance for Rangers that day.
As you say, the defence, how much credit do they deserve that day? Because there's only one change made. McLaren comes off for Jared Nixon, and you would think nowadays, like, the first thing you would think, Gary Boland sitting on the bench, Gary Boland would be on.
Yeah.
I mean, that back three were just colossal that day.
Yeah. And I always remember Hegarty and Neri were on the bench. Heggie was coaching and Neri had injury problems, and they went right on to Welshie at the end. That was the first person they ran over there. Because for a young guy, he pretty much put Mark Haley in his back pocket, which was not an easy thing to do.
No. What was the memories of that day when that final whistle went?
Oh, there was a lot of tears. There was a lot of tears, and I think my old man had passed a couple of years before that. So you start to think about the people that had been all the cup final, loads of cup finals, 7 or 6 of them before, and had lost. And to finally to get it was a really, really emotional time at the final whistle.
Would you think immediately, do you think this is going to be tough? And I don't know if you'll agree, but was there a jealousy with Jim McLean because of that? Do you think that this guy had come straight in and won that, or was because Jim McLean? He doesn't strike me as a guy who would be happy the club had won it, but look, would there be more kind of frustration he didn't win it himself?
Yeah, I think there's bound to be frustrations. You'd be delighted for the players and the fans. You'd be delighted for Ivan, but he'd probably just made him have even more regrets about the times he should have won it.
Yeah,
you know, I think that would have been his feeling. But overall, he only ever wanted what was best for the club at any point, over and above himself. So, but I think what it maybe did was, if you had any thoughts about getting rid of Ivan, it made it incredibly difficult because he had the Scottish Cup on the trophy cabinet. I think that might have been an issue.
We're now at the stage where I want to ask, what was there whispers about the fraught relationship between manager and chairman at the time?
Yeah, and there was always going to be that, because if you know Jim's personality, he needs to be involved in everything at the club. Now, that's maybe not a bad thing. You know, Brian Clough was exactly the same. Fergie was the same. You know, from deciding who's driving the bus to what kind of pies you're getting into, picking the team on a Saturday, you had to know everything. So I think he must have found it incredibly difficult to hand over the reins, and especially with signings. I think he found it difficult that he didn't have the final say on signings. I mean, he used to sometimes come into, we're a bakery not far from Tannadice, he'd come in for his rolls in the morning. And I would sometimes stand and blather him. He started ranting and raving about the boys that Ivan was signing in the middle of the street. Like, okay, Jim, calm down. But that was a difficult thing for him, because he was obviously looking after the purse strings at that time, and he wasn't happy with the standard of the player that was coming in, but he had to give the manager his place.
Mm-hmm. Did you feel a change in the summer? Obviously, when the season started, it was a really poor start to the season. 4 defeats in the first 6 games. It wasn't great, was it? Did you feel a difference at the start of the next season?
Yeah, well, Scott, you know what? Funnily enough, because we were aware of it at the time, just inside whispers, a lot of the young lads felt they wanted to move on. Mm-hmm. I'll be honest with you, if you win a major trophy at a provincial club, you're not going to do any more than that. You're not going to get better than that. You probably are as well moving on. You've got your legendary status, but you're starting to get moans, hearing whispers of moans about money could be earning more elsewhere, which is, you know, fair enough. And Maurice Malpass recently did a podcast speaking about that period, and he said exactly the same. He says there was a change in attitude in the young lads, that they just weren't as maybe committed as they had been. Yeah. Winning the trophy, taking the edge off them. That's probably the best way to describe it. And with not having Jim on them all the time to keep the standards up, things generally start to slip, and they start to slip very, very quickly.
Tatran Prezov. Remember them?
Yes. I didn't go to the away leg, so it wasn't me that was on the wing of the plane as it was coming into land, and that's a true story. Yeah, so that was a disappointing result, because I think they were ahead in the second leg as well. So that was just the kind of typical, the sort of thing that was happening at that time.
Mm-hmm. And as you say, and it's that thing of, can you improve on that? As you say, the Dundee United aren't going to win the league at that point. No. The days were by.
The recruitment wasn't good enough, Scott.
Yes.
You didn't disrespect them. You mentioned like Davy Craig coming in from, I think it was Dumbarton, Ristich from Dundee, and boy Sergio from Brazil, Jorgensen, I think the goalie from Norway or something. He shipped 5 in his first game at Easter Road.
Yeah.
So the standard of the player coming in wasn't up to the standard that the club had employed in the past, basically.
And was that tough as a fan, because obviously Golac had come in and won the cup, but you could see obviously the players he was bringing in just weren't good enough?
Well, you know what, Scott? It was winning the cup. Everybody was on such a high that you were just kind of, we're going to fuck, we've won the cup. You know, although that didn't get me wrong, that started to wear off after a while. But that definitely bought him time that he probably wasn't deserving of the way the season was going.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was still a bit of euphoria surrounding amongst the fans after winning the trophy. But that doesn't last for long when you start to see a load of poor results coming in.
And just results weren't good enough, and it was that simple. I mean, 3-0 at home to Rangers, 4-0, as you say, 5-0 away, 5-0 and 4-0 away to Hibs. The only thing I can point to, a 6-1 win over Motherwell in the middle of January. That was obviously a fascinating day, but could you just get the feeling that there was something going on?
Yeah. When I looked funny, I went and dug out the results today, and I noticed from March to May, we won 1 game out of 11, drew 1 and lost 9. So that tells its own story. So no, you could see it was just a slippery slope. When you know what it's like, if your team's on that slope, it's very hard to get off it, and it's, you lose last minute goals. Boys will be hitting worldies from 30 yards that are going in the top corner that would normally go in the top tier of the stand. So everything just seems to start to go against you. So yeah, you could kind of see it coming from about February, to be honest with you.
And do you think McLean was? Do you think because he'd obviously brought Golac in, and obviously the man that follows the man obviously has it tough. We saw that with Fergie later on, obviously at Man United, but do you think he really had a chance, Golac, with results being so poor? Like, do you think the cachet of the Scottish Cup just wasn't enough?
I think Jim would have been sitting with his finger on the trigger from probably around about Christmas, to be honest with you.
The fascinating thing to me is that, as you say, like Motherwell win, a draw with Rangers, 2 wins at home to Falkirk and Partick Thistle, and then heading into March, it just all falls off a cliff. And
totally.
Yeah. And 2 away defeats to Kilmarnock and Partick Thistle kind of sealed his fate, to be honest. And it was
yes.
What was your memories of the day that eventually the trigger was pulled and he was sacked?
Probably that it was time. It was time for the change. It was because the end of the day they had to do something. There was no real sign of things getting turned round. There was 3 consecutive results there. I think there was another one. Motherwell
was the first game after
Motherwell, Thistle and Killie or something like that, and that's games you're expecting to win if they're Dundee United. So Jim's probably just sitting there itching to pull the trigger, and eventually thought, "Nah, we can't risk the club being relegated." Not that it made any difference, but he's felt he's had to make the decision. And to be fair, I mean, there's other board members as well, so it wouldn't have just been Jim. But I don't think MD was overly shocked that when he went.
The replacement for Golac's obviously Billy Kirkwood, obviously a club legend, had been there with McLean as a player. What was your reaction when he came in? Was it a case of, because he hadn't been a manager, this was his first job? He'd obviously been a coach and things like that, but
I think he was Rangers. Was it Rangers Youth or Rangers?
Yes, it was at Rangers. But what was the kind of feeling of him coming in?
No, quite happy with that. Now, as we've learned to our cost since then, bringing ex-players in as managers has never ever worked, ever. But at the time we thought, yeah, okay, because he was a good player. He's tactically aware. He knows how the club works. He knows the standards. First game, I think Rangers scored within about 60 seconds in his first game at Tannadice. But no, he couldn't buy a win either. I think he got one victory away to Partick Thistle between March and May. So any effort he made to turn it around didn't really work either, to be honest.
And the highest of highs of winning the Scottish Cup the season before to the lowest of lows, being relegated for the Premier Division. I mean, what happened? How does it go from so high to so low in the space of a season?
Yeah, well, it's just a drop in the standards. I mean, as you get older and watch football, as much as academies are important, recruitment is actually key to success at any club. And when you dug out the squad today, funnily enough, and highlighted the signings, I thought these signings are just not good enough. Mm-hmm. You know, and if you marry that to the fact that some of the guys didn't want to be there anymore, it's a recipe for disaster, basically.
Yeah. And McLean obviously stays on. I want to kind of touch on his kind of later on, kind of before he obviously gives up as chairman, but he brings in his brother Tommy. Tommy improves the team drastically, gets Dundee United into the FA Cup. Like, what changed? Like, when was kind of relegation ended up becoming kind of maybe a blessing in disguise because he could bring in somebody close to him who he knew and they could work off each other. Was that maybe kind of the feeling at the time?
I think Kirky had another season. I think Kirky got us up.
Yeah.
And then I think I can't remember, maybe had a poor
5 defeats in the first 6 games, and then he was sacked.
And then Tommy had only started at Wraith Rovers the week before, and Jim went and poached him. But no, because to me, I like a bit of discipline about a football club and standards and so on. So Tommy was as close to Jim as you're going to get, other than Fergie. And he was probably exactly what the club was needing at that time. And again, we talked about recruitment earlier on. He'd been out of the game for a while, but he'd spent his time scouting. So he brought over the Scandinavians, who were all fantastic players. And we went on this long unbeaten run. Actually, I think it ended when we lost it in the semi-final of the Cup to Kelly the year they won it. But he made a huge difference to the club and kind of gave them back their mojo.
Mm-hmm. And the overall legacy of that team, obviously winning that cup, and in particular Golac, what was your kind of memories of that team? Like, if I was to ask you now, what's the overall legacy of Ivan Golac at Dundee United, what would you say?
Oh, I mean, don't get us wrong, that, you know, they've had the union dinners and Ivan's treated like a hero. You know, there's no doubt about it. And the good thing about that team was a lot of the young lads that, you know, we would go out socialising the weekend, and other young boys would be there, Gary Bowen and Grant Johnson, Christian Daly, Craig Brewster, all these lads, Davy Hanna, they'd all be out. So we knew them all. So for them to win the cup was kind of extra special, because they knew how much it meant to us, and we knew how much it meant to them. So it's a special, for MD that was there that day, it's a very, very special memory. And wouldn't it be hard to beat it, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I mean, it must be tremendous, as you say. With Jim McLean, the final words in Jim McLean, obviously, he kind of slows down a bit and the merger comes about. Did that make him unpopular at the time, the potential merger with Dundee?
Well, I don't know much it was about a merger. I think Jim was looking at buying over Dundee.
Yeah.
That was the plan. And the Mars, as far as I'm aware, had agreed to it, and then the last minute pulled out for obvious reasons, because they wouldn't have been able to walk the streets of Dundee again because of the Dundee fans. But I think Jim was probably looking ahead. I mean, you know, is Dundee big enough for 2 clubs? You know, that's another. Certainly couldn't be 2 stadiums. That's for sure. But I don't know if that would have ever worked, to be honest with you. So, you know, that was a kind of strange one as far as I'm concerned.
Mm-hmm. But as you say, it's a really interesting time for Dundee United fans. Obviously, a cup win, and later on won the cup in 2010. But again, it was just breaking that hoodoo, wasn't it? It was just getting over that hurdle of those cup heartaches in the past.
Oh, I mean, there was some horror days at Hampden, and you know, I can still see Frank McGarvey with a top hat on for 85, and you know, Frank McAvenny's big stupid grin for 88, and I still can't even watch them to this day on the telly. But you know what? You've got to suffer sometimes the pain of defeat to enjoy victory all the more, and it just made 1994 all the more enjoyable, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Alan, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. It's been really good to look back in this time. Thank you very much.
Well, fantastic, Scott. I'm well impressed with your knowledge, by the way, I'll tell you.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much for the invite.
Thank you.
Cheers, mate.